Dante wrote, "The path to paradise begins in hell." Join Deacon Don Prendergast and David Fortin as they discuss the tools men need to build the domestic church and the spiritual weapons to defend it. This is Through the Fire.
Hey, Deacon, we're back. You know, over the break, I was thinking a little bit about Saint Dismas, who was the good thief on the cross, and how he must have had sort of a moment of clarity, almost maybe like a purity of heart.
Well, I mean, Dismas is a really amazing character. So here we have a guy who was never baptized, we believe, certainly never received the Eucharist, sacraments of confirmation, never went to confession, and lived a life of a criminal. So, I mean, this is a bad dude beginning to end. Now he finds himself literally on death's door, and his partner in crime is on the other side of Jesus. And we have this very well-known moment where we call Dismas the good thief, as opposed to, we don't really know the name of, or I don't know the name of the bad thief.
Gesmus.
You making that up?
No, I wouldn't do that.
Okay. Yeah, that's new to me. Okay, so we have Dismas, which is the good thief, and tell me again the name of the bad thief.
Gesmus. Yep.
All right, so Gesmus, we're going to go with our resident theologian, David Fortin.
No.
Gesmus. So we have the good thief and the bad thief, and so the good thief seems to have an epiphany. The good thief is looking around and sees and at least knows enough to recognize that, you know, Jesus is hanging there and he's an innocent guy. And he gives this speech about how the good thief and the bad thief, they're being justly punished. So this brings up a moment, you know, certainly Jesus can, you know, he's above the law. You don't necessarily have to follow the teachings of the Catholic Church when you're dealing directly with God. The question is whether or not you are entering into that in a pure way, in a truly profound way. So when we look at blessed are the clean of heart, for they will see God, the first part of it, clean of heart, the church teaches this, the church talks about this from the perspective of living a pure and virtuous life. And while, of course, it's the goal for the entirety of your life to be pure and virtuous so that you can see God, Dismas seemingly had that moment right before his death. But the other question is, what does it mean to see God? How do we see God? How could we possibly even recognize and see God if we do not have a clean heart, if we're not trying to live a virtuous life?
It goes to Mother Teresa, I think.
Yes.
Because she would say that we need to see Jesus in those in front of us.
That's true. When in the thousands upon thousands of people that she took off the streets of Calcutta, I mean, Calcutta, you know, I don't think any of us can really understand and really imagine the depth of poverty and filth that she had dealt with when she arrived to Calcutta many years ago. The idea that in her ministerial life, she would care for the poorest of the poor. And so we're talking about people who are near death on the streets of Calcutta, filthy, wounds with maggots crawling around inside the wounds, the smells, you can only imagine the smells, the pus, the illness, the sick, I mean, just the worst of the worst. And there's plenty of documentaries out there that have Mother Teresa speaking to her new novices that come to learn how to be a member of the community, the Missionaries of Charity. But yeah, Dave, you're absolutely right. There's actually two quotes. One of them, you hit it right on the nail on the head, which is quoted as her saying, every one of them is Jesus in disguise. And it's such a beautiful thing. I mean, talk about pure of heart. How do you see God? I mean, just to imagine that everybody that you come across, especially those who are poor, and she would say poverty is more than just material poverty. She was quoted as saying, I remember hearing in an interview that she gave, material poverty can be satisfied with material goods, but the deeper poverty, the poverty of a lack of love, the poverty of being unwanted, that is a much, much greater poverty. And so she would say the way that she's able to care for the poor is to look into their eyes and to see Jesus, and then just to recognize Jesus in everyone. And that's how you're able to, as she would say, pick up the first person off the streets of Calcutta, which eventually led to more than 40,000 people. I'm sure today it's even more than that. But Dave, one of the quotes of Mother Teresa that I particularly like has to do with service. And she wrote, I am a little pencil in the hand of a writing God sending a love letter to the world. Think about that. I'm just a little pencil. I'm nothing special. The real work, the real beauty, is the one holding the pencil. And to be pure in heart, to understand the virtues of love, forgiveness, charity, to really understand and to be the other Beatitudes, to be meek, to be merciful. They're all related to each other. And they have to be related to each other because they're all expressions of God Himself. I mean, how else can we imagine God other than being merciful? This is one of the big differences between Father, Son, and Spirit and so many other religions. Our God does not need anything from us. He's perfect. He is complete, and He is perfect within Himself. He doesn't need us to do anything. So then you might ask, well, then what's the point? Well, the point is we need to do. We need to be the ones that are merciful. We need to show our love to God. If we have difficulty with somebody in our life, regardless of the reason, well, if you're not going to do it for the sake of that person alone, at least do it for Christ. At least do it because God asks us for our own sake, not for His sake, but for our own sake. I mean, does God need for me to be friendly? If I'm driving my car trying to find a parking spot and somebody cuts me off and pulls into the spot, does God really need me to be forgiving and to wave hello and say, it's okay, I'll find another spot? Does He need me to do that? Would it change God if I was to start yelling at the person? No, it's not going to change God. It's not going to make God more complete because I'm nice or not nice. But me, oh man, it's a world of difference for me. It's absolutely a world of difference. I mean, how many drips of poison can I possibly consume before I'm officially poisoned? How many moments of anger? How many moments of lust? How many moments of greed before I become hedonistic? I mean, that's what the Beatitudes are asking us. The Beatitudes are asking us to avoid a life of, not even a life, to avoid spiritual, supernatural death. To avoid that, Jesus gives us these guidelines. And He tells us if we live this way, two things are going to happen. First, we will have the Holy Spirit dwell within us. We will experience joy in a way that satisfies. Dave, I got to tell you, recently, I work at a children's home, and sometimes it's difficult because you hear the stories, and you see what's happening with these kids and the difficulty, and you worry about their future. Kids that and my story is just one of thousands, but you worry about the future of some of these children who have been treated so badly, and it's fearful even because what are you supposed to do, right? How many kids could I adopt? I've already adopted 5. How many more kids can I adopt? What more can be done? You know, Dave, have you ever heard the story of the starfish? Have you ever heard the starfish story?
I'm not sure I remember it.
So this is a story, and it plays right into exactly what we're talking about, to be clean of heart. My wife and I actually we've somewhat adopted the starfish as a symbolic gesture of the life that we try to live with the children that we've encountered as adoptive parents and foster parents. So the story goes like this. There was a guy walking along the beach a little bit before lunchtime. There was a big storm that churned the ocean waters the night before, and as it churned the waters, it dumped onto the shore thousands of starfish. And so the guy is walking along the beach and he sees all these starfish. And he continues to walk. He's amazed by the number of starfish that the ocean just threw onto the shore. And as he looks down into the distance, he sees somebody seemingly going back and forth from the dunes to the water's edge, back to the dunes to the water's edge, has no idea what this guy is doing. Eventually, he gets close enough to see what the guy's doing. This other person is picking up one by one starfish, throwing them into the water. I mean, there's thousands of them all over the place. He gets close enough where he's able to talk to the guy. He says, "Brother, what are you doing?" And the guy looks at him and says, "I'm throwing the starfish back into the water." And he says to him, he says, "Well, I see that, but I mean, there's thousands of them. It's almost lunchtime. The sun is at the peak in the sky, and they're all going to dry up and die. I mean, there's thousands of them. You really think picking up a few here and there, one at a time, throwing them back into the water, do you really think you're making a difference?" And the guy says to him, he looks at him, and he goes, "Well, I know there's a lot of starfish here, and I understand that most all of them are going to dry up and die in the heat of the sun." And with that, he bends down and he picks up another one, and he tosses it into the water. And he says to him, "It may seem like I'm not making much of a difference on the big scale, but I just now made a difference to that one." Dave, I really do believe that Jesus is calling us to live a life knowing the hardships, understanding the difficulties, understanding the persecution, understanding our mistakes, our frailty. We're not going to do things perfectly.
Right.
But when we have the ability, when we have the desire, the genuine desire to live the Beatitudes, then the Beatitude, "Blessed are the clean of heart, for they will see God." The guy that's picking up the starfish, what was his personal gain? Nothing.
That's the mother that's struggling to pay for her grocery bill, and you just slide your card like you've alluded to in the past.
Yeah, and so this is, and when we think about the good thief and we think about Dismas, and it's never too late. I mean, really, it's never too late. That certainly is what was taught to us by the story of the good thief, the story of Dismas. It's never too late to recognize the path forward and that desire. Dave, I want to read to you from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 18. And so Jesus is speaking here. "At that time, the disciples approached Jesus and said, 'Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' He called a child over and placed it in their midst and said, 'Amen, I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, And whoever receives one child such as this in my name receives me. When we think about being childlike, we're not talking about childish. We're not talking about being immature. What we're really talking about is trusting the way a child is meant to trust a parent. Jesus wants us to trust him with the same kind of commitment, the same kind of love, the same kind of understanding. A child doesn't totally understand, but I've used this expression. I remember when I was a kid, we had a pool in our backyard. It was an above ground pool. It was probably a very small pool, but considering that I was a child, the thing seemed like it was an Olympic swimming pool. But I'm sure it was probably, I don't know, 12, 15 feet across. It was probably a tiny pool, but in my 5-year-old mind, my 4 or 5-year-old mind, it felt like it was in the ocean. But we had a deck. We had a deck on the edge of the pool. On part of the pool had a deck. And I remember my father was teaching me how to swim. And at one point, I'm standing on the edge of the deck, and he tells me, they took the floaties, the inflatable arm floaties off, and so now I'm naked, man. I'm gonna jump into this water with no safety harness, nothing to keep me buoyant. And my father is there in the water, and he looks up at me, and he's got his arms up in the air, and of course, what is he saying? Jump. And I've given homilies where I've talked about this, and I would like to believe many of us have had that experience. Maybe it wasn't a pool, maybe it was a tree. We got stuck up in a tree and our dad comes along and our dad says, "I'll catch you, just jump." Mm-hmm. Or whatever it is, whatever it might be. But to think about that child, to think about that moment, that's a lot of trust. And how is it that the child is even capable of doing that, if not the genuine belief that Dad's going to catch me?
I think it goes back to what St. Thomas Aquinas says about love, is to will the good of other as other. And I think as a child, we have that understanding that that's what our parents are there for, is they really want the best for us. So that's childlike trust.
Yeah. And why not? We run to our mother when we skin a knee or we're feeling sick. We run behind our father's legs when we're out in public and we're scared. This is normal. This is ordered, right? This is properly ordered trust. And so Jesus is saying we need to trust him just like that. We need to trust the Father just like that. We need to trust the Holy Spirit just like that. But that's not what the world teaches. That's not what the world says. The world, which one, I'm not sure the answer to this. Which state is the show me state? Do you know?
Missouri.
Think about that. Show me. Prove it to me. I don't see a whole lot of trust in that moniker, where Jesus says, humble yourself like a child, right. As like a child. Trust. It's not even a blind trust. It's a faithful trust.
And as we talked about in the first half of the show, when we mentioned childhood trauma, it just destroys. Whether if it's a family member, it destroys it at such a deep level.
Oh yeah.
If it's like a neighbor or somebody like that, the child really loses that sense of the world is a safe place, and
oh yeah,
they just begin to collapse on themselves.
If I'm not mistaken, I think the number one demographic for perpetrating sexual abuse on a child is a sibling. I mean, think about it, a sibling. To have betrayal on that level.
Right.
And is it any wonder that society becomes so dark, and even to the point of normalizing sin itself? to normalize and to celebrate sin. We see the whole abortion industry.
Right.
Normalize, to take something that is sacred and holy, marriage,
Yep.
something that is beautiful and properly ordered, a husband and wife having a sexual encounter with themselves together, being in that one flesh union, all of the joy and euphoria that comes out of that, which was designed to bring them even closer to each other, the opportunity to cooperate with creation itself.
Right.
But yet what happens? The devil corrupts that, and society normalizes it and celebrates it. Society celebrates it. And when the inconvenient child appears around the second month or so, oh, we have a solution for that also.
Right.
So we can turn the bed into an altar of debauch, of sin, of hedonistic corruption.
Right.
The bed becomes an altar of evil, of the diabolical kind. And then when the fruits of that evil sacrament are revealed, no problem. We can offer that life up to the gods of Baphomet and Baal. Absolutely disordered. As opposed to a properly ordered sex drive to be driven towards the other, have that union blessed in the sacrament of holy matrimony, and consummated where the wedding bed becomes yet another sacramental experience, where it's no longer the two, but three, and the third being God himself. And out of the fruits of that comes not death, but life.
Deacon, I want to go back to for they shall see God. I have one question I'd like to ask you about that.
Yeah.
And that is, and we do this quite often. We go back to Adam in the garden where Adam
Yep.
walked with God. Did he see God? And is that what the Beatitudes are trying to bring us back to, is to be able to see God?
Well, here's the bigger question. Where will you see God? If you don't have a pure heart, is it even possible to notice that God is waiting for you to recognize him? It's important for us to remember that when we hear about all of the stories of false gods and how we read in the Old Testament, we read the stories of how worshipers would have to, cut their flesh and sacrifice and all this stuff in order to appease the gods. And so the perspective of evil and disorder, the perspective of corruption, is never going to give you the opportunity to see God. And when going back, like you said, to Genesis, Dave, if we go back to Genesis, we know, because it's written right there, that God would walk through the garden in the cool of the day. He'd be walking through the garden while Adam and Eve were there. God would be walking through the garden. Now, whether or not it was a physical person walking through the garden, I don't know if that's necessarily important, as opposed to God's presence was with them side by side as they walked through the garden. And who doesn't love a walk in the cool of the day as opposed to in the heat? So the bigger implications of that story, because I say that only because there's another part of Scripture that says nobody can see God and live. But even those implications may be the result of our fallen nature. The bigger issue here is, yes, in the beginning, before corruption, before the fall of mankind, God and humanity walked in harmony. You were able to see God. You know, we don't believe in some pantheistic religion where we see God in the trees and we see God, God embodies this and that and we see him here and there. A better way of seeing God would be to consider all of God's creation. All of God's creation certainly has his fingerprints on it. And to recognize that all of God's creation has his marker on it, because even the words that we were created in his image and likeness. To be able to have a clean heart means that you're able to see God in others, and seeing God in others brings us back to being children before God.
I'm reminded of St. Francis's words. Well, it wasn't really his words, but he loved creation, but loved the Creator more. And I think that's a really good way of understanding being pure of heart, is understanding everything has its place, but God has got to be the number one priority.
Yeah, and for those who are struggling with the idea of, but I got this knucklehead living next door to me that I really don't like, how am I supposed to be clean of heart and live virtuously and all of that? You begin by saying to yourself, if I can't do it for my own sake, I will do it for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. I'll do it for God. That's not a horrible place to start. And I tell you, over time, it will just become part of who you are, that, you know what, I'm somebody who is going to see the good in everyone first. I'm going to trust. Will I get taken advantage of from time to time? Yeah, you will. But again, we go back to the Beatitudes. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward will be great in heaven. And my brothers and sisters, we have to remember this 100 years that we have in this lifetime, it's nothing compared to eternity.
Deacon, we got to leave it there, man. Hey, friends, don't forget to check us out at www.castingthe.net, where you can find all our shows from the past and some stuff about us going forward in the future. For Deacon Don Prendergast, I'm David Fortin. We'll see you next week.
The preceding program was a Spirit of Truth Radio Arts original program for CastingThe.net.